This is the Dark Zero Horror Network. Psychological Autopsies.
No! Oh God! No!
Welcome to the debate. Look, few franchises in horror history have rewritten their own mythology as often and as dramatically as Halloween. We're talking 13 films, nearly 50 years, and at least 5 distinct official timelines? So making any claim about the definitive Michael Myers story is, well, it's an inherently complex but absolutely fascinating challenge.
It really is. It's like a cinematic choose-your-own adventure. Depending on which sequel you decide to watch, Michael Myers is either this, supernatural force bound by ancient Celtic rituals, or he's just a simple, unexplainable killer who happened to pick the wrong babysitter.
And we're going to focus today on 2 of the major continuities that really vie for that title. So first, you have the original, or Thorn timeline. That includes the foundational films Halloween 1 and 2, then jumps to 4, 5, and 6. And second, the modern H40, or Blumhouse timeline. So that's H1, 2018, kills and ends. Now, I'm going to maintain that the original timeline is superior. It honors the foundational, iconic lore, particularly the central role of Dr. Loomis, and those high-stakes family ties that really propelled the narrative for decades.
And I'm coming at this from a different angle. I believe the H40 timeline, the one from Blumhouse, provides a superior, cleaner, and ultimately more impactful narrative by stripping away decades of frankly convoluted backstory, especially that family connection. This timeline successfully returned Michael to his absolute scariest form, just pure, unexplained evil. And it focuses instead on the lasting, grounded psychological scars of random violence.
Well, the strength of the original timeline and, what makes it so foundational is its dedication to the one character who defined the threat right from the very start, Dr. Sam Loomis, Donald Pleasance Loomis. That he wasn't just a supporting character, he was in a way the narrator of the entire mythology. His presence across that whole Thorn continuity establishes Michael not just as some killer, but as the embodiment of evil with the devil's eyes. That intensity it provided the necessary cosmic weight to Michael's actions, even when the films themselves weren't, let's say, top tier. Loomis's monologues are absolutely central to the franchise's identity. I mean, think about him in Halloween 4, just insisting the fire didn't kill Michael, or delivering that chilling line in Halloween 5 about praying Michael would burn in hell, knowing full well that hell would not have him. His unwavering obsession, it establishes the entire framework for how we understand the boogeyman, period.
And that's a powerful argument, I'll give you that. But I would argue that his devotion eventually became a narrative liability. Loomis's obsession, while it's iconic, it pushed him to become almost a self-parody later on, It really started to strain credibility in the lesser installments. And his death, it was so unsatisfyingly handled off-screen in the theatrical cut of The Curse of Michael Myers. It just showed the timeline didn't quite know what to do with its most essential character outside of Michael himself.
But his obsession defines the threat. It forces the audience to grapple with the supernatural element that's just inherent in a character who simply refuses to die. And beyond Loomis, the original timeline provided really compelling narrative stakes with the sibling dynamic. Now, look, I know the revelation that Laurie was Michael's sister was a retcon in Halloween 2, but it was a necessary one for the sequels. It provided this narrative momentum that was later transferred to Michael's pursuit of his niece, Jamie Lloyd, in H4 and H5. That creative, narrative-driven conflict, Michael going after his own blood, a 9-year-old girl, it resonated so deeply. It wasn't just random teenagers anymore, it was this targeted, mythological evil, and that made the fear far more specific and frankly more terrifying. The continuity, especially anchored by the high-stakes drama of H4, is a definitive, nostalgic, and structurally coherent run.
I am sorry, but I just don't buy that the convoluted nature of the Thorn timeline, which, needed to explain that sibling dynamic, makes it definitive. The H40 timeline recognized that the best way forward was, it was radical simplification. It achieved the most successful revival of the core concept by wiping the slate completely clean.
and just acknowledging the original 1978 film. And crucially, this removes the brother-sister angle entirely. That allows Michael to revert to the purest form of the boogeyman, an unexplained random force of nature. So when he targets Laurie in the 2018 film, it's not some predetermined destiny. It's a circumstantial trauma that's just been allowed to metastasize for 40 years. This completely strengthens Laurie Strode's character. Her paranoia, her house full of gun cages, her hypervigilance, it all stems from just being an unfortunate victim of a random incident. That grounded, modern approach to long-term trauma makes her transformation into the survivalist grandma with a shotgun a deeply compelling contemporary arc.
I see why you think that. I do. Stripping away the history creates a cleaner slate and makes the trauma maybe more relatable. But the sibling connection, as messy as it was, it provided essential dramatic friction. The stakes just felt higher because it wasn't about who survived, but the survival of a specific bloodline. Michael's pursuit of Jamie Lloyd in H4 was truly terrifying because he was so relentlessly fixed on his own blood. Your H40 approach, it kind of reduces Michael's motivation to pure circumstance, which makes the 40 years of silent waiting feel almost arbitrary. If he's just random evil, why is he so focused on Laurie Strode 40 decades later? The Thorne timeline, flawed as it became, at least provided a terrifying answer. He has a purpose, however dark and mythological it is.
But randomness is the point. That's the whole thing. It reflects Carpenter's original concept of Michael as pure, unexplained evil. The moment his motives become familial, you immediately raise questions of internal logic, like why did he kill his older sister Judith but then only stalk Laurie? And that curiosity, it demands an explanation, which is exactly what happened when the Thorne timeline tried to answer its own questions by introducing the messy, messy lore of the cult of Thorne in H6. And for those who aren't familiar with that deep-cut lore, the cult of Thorne basically explains that Michael is cursed by this ancient druid thing, which compels him to kill his entire bloodline on Halloween night. This entire complex structure, with arcane tattoos and ritual sacrifice, it moves the franchise miles away from its simple, horrifying boogeyman roots. The H40 timeline avoids needing that kind of over-explanation entirely.
Touched on the true central disagreement here, right? Whether Michael Myers is more terrifying when his evil is defined or when it is purely ambient. But if we set aside the sibling stakes for a moment, the true difference is in who anchors the fear, the psychiatrist or the survivor. And I maintain Loomis's unwavering obsession provided that necessary philosophical counterweight to Michael's evil.
I'll acknowledge the myth-making that Loomis achieved, for sure. But as a narrative anchor, the H40 timeline succeeded by focusing the conflict entirely on Laurie Strode. We see her preparing for Michael's return since 1978. That whole saga of survival against untreatable PTSD, the decades of preparation, her broken relationship with her daughter and granddaughter, that is a modern, compelling, and relatable protagonist journey. Her battle felt centered and honest. It showed the long-term psychological damage of enduring an event like 1978.
But that story arc doesn't exist in a vacuum. I'm not convinced by that, because Loomis's constant warning is what defines the scale of the threat. The H40 timeline's complete exclusion of Loomis actually makes Michael's initial story feel ineffectual, because it neglects the one man who set the standard for the threat he posed. The 2018 film has to work extra hard to reestablish Michael's boogeyman status because they cut the character who provided the whole framework. And furthermore, while you're praising Laurie's arc, the conclusion of the Blumhouse trilogy, it severely undermines everything you've just championed. Halloween Ends completely sidelines Laurie for a new, unrelated antagonist, Corey Cunningham. It reduces Michael to this weakened figure who is essentially usurped by a copycat. That betrayal of the central conflict proves the H40 structure ultimately failed its lead character.
That is the crucial point of comparison. And it's a fair criticism. Both timelines are severely dragged down by their final chapters. It just speaks to how difficult it is to conclude the Michael Myers story without resorting to either over-explanation or outright narrative cowardice. But the nature of the failure in Ends is distinct from the failure of H6. The Thorne timeline failure came from a mandate to explain the myth. It crashed because it tried to fit a powerful, simple monster into a complex supernatural box.
And in the Thorn timeline, the Curse of Michael Myers introduced that messy, convoluted cult lore. You're right, it was trying way too hard to explain the evil. However, it still contained Donald Pleasance's final, essential performance. The supernatural elements, while messy, were at least an attempt to define the evil that Loomis had been describing since 1978. It maintained a thematic consistency. It's a bad film that at least stayed focused on Michael and his prescribed mythology.
But Halloween Ends is arguably a far worse structural failure. It doesn't just introduce messy mythology. It fundamentally disrespects the central conflict that defined the entire H40 reboot. We waited 40 years to see Laurie versus Michael, and then the final chapter introduces Corey Cunningham and shifts the entire narrative focus. The timeline you prefer, the Thorn timeline, it maintained the central powerful figure of Michael Myers throughout. Even in H6, Michael is the engine. Ends reduces Michael to an ailing secondary figure, allowing some unrelated character to steal the spotlight. The Blumhouse timeline promised a clean, brutal, focused look at pure evil and its psychological cost, and then it chickened out. It gave us a story about trauma transfer and a new villain when all the audience wanted was the promised showdown. That narrative inconsistency, it fundamentally betrays the clean slate it started with.
Exactly. Even with the undeniable, frustrating flaws of H6 and its reliance on overly detailed lore, the overall journey through H1, 2, 4, and 5 is arguably a stronger, more complete, and certainly more foundational experience than the H40 trilogy. The Blumhouse timeline, despite its brilliant start with 2018 and the brutal middle of Kills, it just crashes so spectacularly with its finale that it undermines the entire premise of random evil against enduring trauma. The original timeline, anchored by Loomis and the high-stakes family drama, feels more defining and narratively cohesive across its run. The original timeline, with its focus on the sibling connection and the persistence of Dr. Loomis, provided a rich, foundational structure. It gave Michael a mythological gravity that explains his decades-long persistence.
And I'll reassert that the H40 timeline's commitment to narrative simplicity, acknowledging only H1, and its focus on the real-world psychological consequences of random, unforgivable violence. It created a powerful modern arc for Laurie Strode. That clean premise is fundamentally superior, despite the deeply unpopular execution of its final chapter. The H40 vision was, I think, ultimately more true to the spirit of the original film's unexplained dread.
I think it just proves that the enduring appeal of the Halloween franchise lies in these very debates. The fact that we can seriously argue whether the original Thorn narrative or the Laurie-focused H2O continuity, the anthology approach of Halloween 3, or even the grim alternative of the Rob Zombie films offers the best structure. It demonstrates that complexity often requires multiple perspectives to really appreciate the material.
We encourage all listeners of the Dark Zero Horror Network to weigh in on which timeline truly defines the Michael Myers saga. Whether you prefer your evil mythological or random, there's certainly no shortage of material to dissect.
Thank you for joining this spirited discussion. Please like and subscribe for more content and debates as we continue to unpack the lore and the terror of the horror genre.